The crack of a shotgun ripped across the shooting field, followed by a burst of orange dust where a clay pigeon had existed half a second earlier. A few guests along the viewing deck clapped politely. My brother soaked it up like it was oxygen. Brantley Prescott lowered his shotgun and grinned at the crowd gathered around him. The polished walnut stock of the Italian-made firearm practically glowed under the afternoon light. He'd spent nearly $18,000 on it 3 months earlier, and somehow found a way to mention the price every single time he touched it. Some people collected watches. Brantley collected attention. Another clay target launched from the far machine. The shotgun barked again. The target exploded. 23 straight, Brantley announced loudly. Nobody had asked. The Prescott family's shooting estate stretched across hundreds of private acres outside Ashford Ridge. Guests wandered between catered food stations, whiskey bars, and shooting lanes while executives from defense companies pretended this was all about charity and fellowship. It was mostly about ego. The Asa smelled like gun oil, expensive bourbon, and crushed autumn leaves. I stood near the back of the group wearing an old hunting jacket and a pair of boots that had seen better years. My shotgun wasn't custom-made in Italy. It wasn't engraved. It didn't come with a leather presentation case. It was simply a tool, just like me, at least according to my family. Pull! Another clay target launched. This time Brantley fired too quickly. The shot missed completely. The target sailed untouched across the sky before disappearing behind a line of oak trees. A brief silence followed. Then Brantley laughed and shrugged. Can't hit them all. My father immediately laughed with him. Of course he did. Von Prescott stood beside the shooting station holding a glass of 20-year-old scotch. His gray jacket probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Everything about him projected authority, success, and the expectation that the world should agree with him. Most people did. He owned Prescott Dynamics. The company had government contracts worth billions. People tended to nod when men like my father spoke. A defense consultant standing nearby raised his glass. Congratulations on the armor contract, Vaughn. That got Brantley's attention immediately. His favorite subject was himself. Actually, Brantley said, that was my deal. He set the shotgun down and straightened his shoulders. The Sentinel X armor package just closed. Largest tactical protection contract Prescott Dynamics has landed in 12 years. Several guests congratulated him. He accepted every compliment like a king accepting tribute. Frontline deployment starts next quarter, he continued. Tens of thousands of units. Impressive, someone said. It is impressive, Brantley agreed. I almost laughed. At least he was honest about his lack of humility. My father looked proud enough to burst. He's taking this company further than I ever did. Brantley smiled. Then his eyes found me. That smile changed immediately. It always did. Meanwhile, he said, Keely is still doing whatever it is she does. A few people glanced toward me. I took a sip of coffee from a paper cup. Still pushing papers at the supply depot, Keely? He asked. A few guests chuckled. Brantley continued. Must be hard watching real power from the sidelines. I looked down at my boots. The left one had a scratch, near the toe. Brantley noticed. Of course he noticed. You know, he said, I could probably get you an office job here. Better pay, better clothes, more laughter. I said nothing. That annoyed him. Bullies always want participation. My father swirled his scotch and smiled. Not a warm smile. A familiar one. The kind I'd seen my entire life. Leave your sister alone, Brantley. The words sounded supportive. They weren't. My father looked directly at me. She made her choice. A pause. Then came the part he really wanted to say. Some people build legacies. Another pause. Others don't. A few uncomfortable smiles appeared around the group. Nobody wanted to challenge the man signing contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. My father took another drink. She chose a life with no rank and no legacy. That landed exactly the way he intended, like a punch. The funny thing was that neither of them actually knew what I did for a living. Not really. The official version was boring. Military logistics, audits, inventory reviews, compliance inspections, the kind of work people stopped listening to after 3 sentences. That was intentional. The truth wasn't something I could discuss at family gatherings or anywhere else. So I let them believe whatever made them comfortable. For 10 years. 10 very long years. Brantley grinned and picked up his shotgun again. Maybe one day you'll finally get promoted. More laughter. I looked toward the launch station. Another clay pigeon was already loaded. Ready. Waiting. The operator glanced at Brantley. Pull. Brantley nodded. The target launched. He fired. I missed again. This time nobody laughed quite as quickly. The orange disc continued climbing, still intact, still flying. I stepped forward before anyone said a word. The crowd quieted. I raised my shotgun. The movement was smooth, automatic. Years of repetition, years of training, years my family knew nothing about. The metallic click of me cocking the shotgun sliced through the conversation. Sharp, precise, final. Even Brantley stopped smiling. I tracked the target, calculated the lead, pressed the trigger, the shotgun roared. The clay pigeon vanished instantly. A cloud of orange dust drifted across the sky. Gone. Several heads turned toward me. Nobody spoke, not immediately. My father lowered his glass. Brantley's expression tightened, just a little. I lowered the shotgun and handed it back to the range attendant. No celebration, no speech, no bragging. The silence lasted longer than the shot. Have you ever been underestimated by the very people who should have known your worth? Tell me in the comments. And if you enjoy stories about dignity, courage, and proving people wrong without saying a word, remember that new stories premiere every day at 8:30 a.m. ET and 1:30 p.m. ET. Subscribe, make us part of your daily routine, and I'll see you at the next premiere. The smoke drifting from my barrel slowly disappeared into the cool air, and as I watched it fade, memories I'd spent years keeping buried began pushing their way back to the surface. The smoke was gone within seconds, but the look on my father's face lingered a little longer. Not because I'd hit the target, because I'd done it without needing applause. That had always confused people like Von Prescott. They measured success by who was watching. I measured it by who was protected. The crowd gradually drifted back toward the main patio. Conversations restarted. Glasses clinked. Someone laughed too loudly near the bourbon station. Within minutes, the moment was forgotten by everyone except me. That was usually how my life worked, invisible. 10 years earlier, I had been standing in a federal conference room in Arlington reviewing inventory discrepancies worth $73,482.16. Nothing glamorous, nothing exciting. At least, that's what I thought. 3 people walked into that room. One was a colonel. One was a civilian investigator. The third never introduced himself. He simply slid a folder across the table. Inside were photographs, body armor, equipment reports, casualty summaries, dead soldiers. The report showed that a defense contractor had knowingly supplied defective protective plates to an infantry unit overseas. The company saved money. 6 soldiers paid for it. I remember staring at one photograph longer than the others. A 22-year-old specialist from Oklahoma. The armor had cracked during impact testing, months before deployment. Someone buried the report. Someone approved the shipment anyway. Someone made a bonus. The specialist never came home. That was the day I learned corruption wasn't about money. Money was just the receipt. The real cost was measured in people. 3 weeks later, I was recruited into a task force that officially didn't exist. No public commendations. No impressive titles. No speeches. No social media photos of promotions. The Department of Defense needed investigators who could move through the military unnoticed. People who could audit contracts, trace hidden supply chains, and expose companies willing to gamble with service members' lives. Most criminals expected soldiers. They didn't expect accountants. That worked in our favor. I accepted immediately. The promotion opportunities vanished overnight. My public career stopped climbing. My personnel file became intentionally boring. On paper, I became exactly what my family thought I was. A forgettable logistics officer, a paper pusher, a disappointment. The cover worked so well that even Vaughn believed it, especially Vaughn. For years, I attended family dinners while listening to lectures about ambition. Brantley loved those dinners. They were his favorite stage. He would brag about acquisitions, contracts, luxury vehicles, private investments, and executive retreats. Nobody bragged harder than a man desperate for validation. One Thanksgiving, he spent 15 straight minutes explaining why his new Gulfstream fractional ownership package was smarter than owning a yacht. Nobody had asked. My father nodded through the entire presentation. Meanwhile, I was sitting 3 seats away investigating a completely different defense manufacturer for fraudulent testing records. The irony never stopped being funny or exhausting. At Christmas, Vaughn once asked how much money I earned. I told him. The room went silent. Brantley laughed so hard he nearly dropped his wine glass. "You make less than my watch collection." He actually said that. My mother would have told him to stop. She passed away 7 years ago. After that, nobody bothered. I learned something valuable during those years. People reveal their character when they think you have nothing to offer them. My father wasn't cruel because he was powerful. He was cruel because he thought power protected him from consequences. Brantley inherited that belief. I inherited my mother's patience. Most days. Not all. A burst of laughter from the patio pulled me back to the present. The charity guests were gathering near the estate's stone terrace, overlooking the lower shooting fields. Servers moved through the crowd carrying trays of appetizers. A local congressman was shaking hands with donors. Everything looked polished, respectable, patriotic. The kind of event photographers loved. I was walking past a row of outdoor tables when I noticed Sienna. My sister-in-law rarely looked comfortable at family events. She wore expensive dresses, lived in expensive houses, drove expensive cars. But her eyes always looked tired. Today was no different. She was carrying a thick black binder and trying to answer a phone call at the same time. The combination wasn't going well. The binder slipped. Pages exploded across the patio stones. Several guests stepped around them without helping. That seemed about right. I walked over. Need a hand? Relief flashed across her face. Please. We both knelt down. She grabbed the larger folders while I collected loose paperwork scattered beneath a table. Years of investigative work train your eyes in strange ways. It's supposed to be paper. I see patterns, vendor codes, certification stamps, batch numbers, approval signatures, problems. One page immediately caught my attention, a manufacturing manifest. Nothing unusual at first glance. Then I noticed the alloy specification line. My hand froze. I looked again. Maybe I'd read it wrong. I hadn't. The document listed material codes for the new Sentinel X tactical armor contract Brantley had spent all afternoon celebrating. The alloy designation wasn't approved for military ballistic applications. Not even close. My pulse slowed. That's always how it happened. People think investigators get excited. We don't. We get quiet. The quieter I become, the worse the problem usually is. I scanned the rest of the page. Production lot numbers, supplier references, material sourcing records. Everything appeared legitimate until you understood what you were looking at. The alloy met commercial standards, not combat standards. There was a difference, a deadly one. I flipped to the next sheet, then another. The same material appeared again, and again, and again, thousands of units, maybe more. A cold feeling settled into my stomach, not fear, recognition. I'd seen this pattern before, companies quietly replacing certified materials with cheaper alternatives. Margins improve, profits increase, executives celebrate. Soldiers take the risk. Sienna reached for the stack. Thanks. Brantley's been carrying these everywhere lately. I handed the papers back carefully. What are they? Oh, manufacturing reports, she shrugged. He barely sleeps anymore. That wasn't the detail that caught my attention. Something else did. The nervousness in her voice. The way she immediately looked toward the main building. The way people do when they're afraid of being overheard. A small crack had just appeared in a very large wall, and for the first time all afternoon, Brantley's bragging no longer sounded like arrogance. It sounded like a warning. I waited until the estate disappeared in my rearview mirror before pulling off the road. Not because I was emotional, because I needed to think. The manufacturing codes from that binder kept replaying in my head. One number in particular. A supplier designation I'd seen years earlier during an investigation involving defective vehicle plating. At the time, the company had quietly settled with the government. Nobody went to prison. 3 soldiers were buried before the settlement was signed. I sat in my truck for another minute, then started the engine again. By the time I reached my apartment, the sun was gone. My place wasn't impressive. A 2-bedroom unit above a small bookstore on Alder Street. The refrigerator hummed louder than it should. The kitchen faucet occasionally leaked. The carpet was old. I loved it. Nobody walked in and immediately started talking about net worth. I dropped my keys on the counter and opened my laptop. The work machine stayed in its secured case. Tonight I was starting with public records. That was usually enough. People imagine corruptions as something hidden deep underground. Most of the time it's sitting right in front of everyone. You just have to know where to look. I pulled up Prescott Dynamics' supplier network, then subcontractors, then secondary vendors. 3 hours disappeared. Purchase orders, shipping manifests, material certifications, import records, corporate registrations. The deeper I went, the worse it became. At 11:43 p.m., I found the first crack. A metals supplier located outside Phoenix, nothing unusual there. except the company had reported annual production capacity of roughly 82,000 pounds. Prescott Dynamics had purchased over 240,000 pounds from them in 6 months. The math didn't work. I dug further. The supplier wasn't actually manufacturing most of the material. They were buying it from overseas distributors and relabeling it. That explained the volume. It didn't explain the missing certifications. Midnight came and went. Then 1 a.m. Coffee replaced dinner. At 1:17 a.m., I found another discrepancy. The alloy listed on military testing documents wasn't matching the alloy appearing on transportation records. Not a typo. A substitution. My stomach tightened. I opened another spreadsheet, then another, and another. The pattern was suddenly everywhere. Certified materials entering the process, uncertified materials leaving it. Someone was swapping components somewhere between procurement and final assembly. Not occasionally. Systematically. Deliberately. I leaned back in my chair. The room felt very quiet. Outside, a car passed through the intersection below. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. Normal sounds, an ordinary night. Meanwhile, thousands of pieces of tactical armor were moving toward military deployment. I opened a ballistic testing database. Then I entered the alloy composition from Sienna's binder. The results appeared almost immediately. My heart sank. The substitute alloy wasn't designed for sustained combat impacts. It met commercial protection standards, warehouse security, industrial applications, private contracting, not active war zones, not infantry operations, not roadside explosives, not rifle rounds. I stared at the screen. The armor wouldn't necessarily fail every time. That was what made it so dangerous. It would pass SPASM inspections, pass casual tests until the wrong impact happened. Then it wouldn't. That's how soldiers die, not from dramatic failures. From tiny decisions made in conference rooms, a cheaper supplier, assigned approval, a bonus target, a quarterly earnings report, I rubbed my eyes and kept going. Around 2:30 a.m., I found the financial records. That was when everything changed. Until that point, part of me had been hoping this was negligence, carelessness, bad oversight, something fixable. I was wrong. The financial transfers told a different story. Executive incentive payments, performance bonuses, contract acceleration rewards. The savings generated from the material substitutions were being tracked, measured, celebrated. Someone knew exactly what they were doing. Someone was making money from every shortcut. I recognized one of the approval signatures, Brantley Prescott, my brother. The room suddenly felt smaller. I looked away from the screen. For a long moment, I simply sat there. People like to imagine moral decisions arriving dramatically. They don't. Usually they arrive quietly. At a kitchen table, in an apartment, at 2 a.m, with nobody watching. I wanted the numbers to be wrong. I wanted the signatures to be forged. I wanted some explanation that would let me close the laptop and go to sleep. Instead, every new document confirmed the same thing. This wasn't family arrogance anymore. This wasn't Brantley showing off at a shooting range. This wasn't Vaughn making another cruel joke. This was blood money. My brother wasn't just overbilling the government. He was sending men and women into combat wearing equipment that could fail when they needed it most. I thought about all the service members who would never know the names of the executives making those decisions. They would trust the armor, trust the testing, trust the certification process, trust people like Brantley. The same way young soldiers always do. A lump formed in my throat. Not because I felt sorry for Brantley. Because I knew exactly who would pay the price. The names wouldn't be Prescott. They never were. I stood and walked towards a small bookshelf near the living room window. An old framed photograph sat on the top shelf. My unit, taken years earlier, 32 people smiling into the camera. Some had retired, some had moved on. 3 weren't alive anymore. I knew every name, every face. I picked up the frame. One memory surfaced immediately. A young sergeant named Ethan Burke, 24 years old, loved terrible country music, talked nonstop during long transports, made everyone laugh. His mother still mailed Christmas cards to half the unit. I wondered what she would say if she knew executives were gambling with soldiers' lives to improve profit margins. I already knew the answer, the same answers I'd give. There are mistakes, and then there are choices. This was a choice. I looked back at the laptop, then at the photograph, then back at the laptop again. If I submitted what I'd found, Prescott Dynamics would collapse. My father would lose everything. Brantley would almost certainly face federal charges. The family name would become a headline. The consequences would be permanent. If I stayed silent, none of that would happen. The company would survive. My father would never know. My brother would never know. The family would remain intact. For a moment, the temptation was real. Then my eyes settled on the photograph again. 32 faces. Not one of them had signed up to become collateral damage for a corporate bonus. The answer became painfully simple. Family loyalty has limits. Protecting innocent people doesn't. I sat back down, opened a secure evidence folder, and began organizing every document I'd collected. Because silence wasn't neutrality anymore. Silence was participation. I spent the next morning looking for a reason not to visit my father. Every piece of evidence told me the same story. Every spreadsheet. Every approval signature. Every supplier record. The case was already strong enough to move forward. But there was one thing the documents couldn't answer. Did Von Prescott know? Not suspect, not overlook. No, there was a difference, a small one legally, a massive one morally. By noon, I found myself standing in the lobby of Prescott Dynamics headquarters. The building rose 43 stories above downtown Harbor Point. Glass, steel, money. The kind of place designed to make visitors feel smaller than the people working inside. I used to come here when I was a teenager. Back then, I thought my father had built something admirable. Now I wasn't so sure. The receptionist recognized me immediately. Her smile looked nervous. "Good afternoon, Ms. Prescott. Is he available?" She hesitated. "Let me check." 30 seconds later, I was riding a private elevator toward the executive floor. Nobody stopped me. Nobody questioned me. Being family still opened doors, at least for the moment. My father occupied the entire corner section of the building. The office was larger than my apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the harbor. Several military aircraft models sat inside glass display cases. Photographs covered one wall. Senators, generals, foreign dignitaries, executives. People with influence. People my father collected the same way other men collected trophies. He didn't stand when I entered. That wasn't unusual. Vaughn believed standing up for someone implied equality. He rarely made that mistake. "What brings you here?" No hello, no smile, straight to business. I remained near the front of his desk. "I need 10 minutes. You've got 5. Fair enough." I reached into my jacket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. Not the evidence package. Not the investigative file. Not the financial records. Just one handwritten page. A summary. A chance. His chance. I placed it on the desk. "The Sentinel-X armor program has a problem." My father glanced at me, then at the paper. Then back at me. "What kind of problem?" "The alloy certifications don't match production records." His expression didn't change. I continued. "There are material substitutions in the supply chain. Still nothing. The armor should be recalled." That got a reaction. Not concern. Annoyance. The kind people show when someone interrupts their lunch. "You came here for this?" I nodded. "Yes." My father leaned back in his chair. "Based on what?" I chose my words carefully. "Based on information I've seen." "Information from where?" "I can't discuss that." A faint smile appeared, not a pleasant one. There it was. The opening he thought he'd found. "You can't discuss it because you don't know what you're talking about." I took a breath. "Stay focused. Stay calm. I know enough to know this can still be fixed." He laughed. Actually laughed. The sound bounced around the office. "If there's an issue, our engineers will address it. There isn't time, then they'll work faster." "Dad." His eyes narrowed. I hadn't called him that all day. The word landed differently. For a brief moment, he listened, so I pushed. "Quietly recall." I pointed toward the note. "I review every supplier, certify every shipment, take the loss." He stared at me. I kept going. "Nobody needs to get hurt." 3 longer sentences, then the truth. This can still be stopped. For the first time, genuine irritation crossed his face. Not because of what I said, because I was still speaking. He slid the paper back across the desk without reading a single line. Not one. The folded sheet stopped directly in front of me. "I built this company from nothing." His voice was colder now. "I've negotiated contracts on 4 continents." Another pause. "I don't take business advice from logistics clerks." There it was, the familiar dismissal. The same one I'd heard my entire life. Except this time people's lives were attached to it. I looked at the paper between us. "You haven't even read it." "I don't need to." "You should." No, the conversation was slipping away, fast. I tried one final approach, not as an investigator, not as an officer, as his daughter. "If there's even a chance I'm right," he cut me off immediately. "If there's even a chance you're wrong?" Silence. Then he stood. That usually meant the meeting was over. I think you've spent too many years around bureaucrats. I said nothing. My father walked toward the window overlooking the harbor. The military is a machine, Keeley. The words came casually, like he was discussing inventory. Machines break. I felt my stomach tighten, he continued. People get hurt. Another shrug, that's reality. No emotion, no hesitation, no shame. I suddenly understood something that had bothered me since last night. The signatures, the bonuses, the substitutions. They weren't hidden from him. He simply didn't care. Casualties weren't consequences in his mind. They were numbers, forecasts, margins. I stared at the man who had raised me. For the first time, I realized I wasn't looking at a father defending his company. I was looking at an executive protecting a revenue stream. Nothing more, nothing less. My voice came out quieter than I expected. Those aren't numbers. They are in my business. The answer arrived instantly, like he'd said it 1,000 times before. Maybe he had. I picked up the folded paper. The final opportunity was gone. My father returned to his desk. Conversation finished. Decision made. Then he delivered the sentence that would replay in my head for days. You have no rank, Keeley. His eyes locked onto mine. You have no authority here. A pause. Then the last blow. Go back to your desk. I stood there for a moment, not angry, not shocked, just certain, completely certain. I slipped the paper into my jacket, turned around, walked toward the door. No dramatic speech, no threats, no warnings. Grace had already been offered. The heavy office door closed behind me with a deep, solid thud. The sound echoed through the executive hallway, and less than 24 hours later, a different sound answered it. The sharp, rhythmic impact of an official federal authorization stamp landing on a warrant package. The sound stayed with me longer than I expected. Not my father's words. The door. That heavy executive office door closing between us. Something about it felt final. By the time I reached the federal facility outside Arlington the following morning, I already knew what I was going to do. I just hadn't admitted it out loud yet. The security process took 17 minutes. Identification check, biometric verification, escort authorization, 2 secured checkpoints, no windows, no signs, no indication from the outside that anything important happened there. That was intentional. The people inside those rooms weren't interested in recognition, only results. An agent escorted me through a series of secured corridors before stopping outside a briefing room. The steel door opened. General Thaddeus Croft was already inside. He was sitting alone at the far end of the table. No aides, no staff officers, no audience, just a 4-star general and a stack of empty folders. Croft stood as I entered. Unlike my father, he always stood. Not because rank required it, because respect mattered to him. Commander Prescott. Sir, he motioned toward the chair across from him. I sat down. The room was completely silent. No phones, no computers running, no distractions. Only the folder resting in front of me. The real folder, the one my father never saw. I stared at it for a moment. Month of evidence collection, financial records, supplier chains, material certifications, internal communications, executive approvals. Every document connected to Prescott Dynamics armor contract, every shortcut, every lie, every decision. My entire family fit inside 3 inches of paper. Funny how that works. People spend decades building empires. Then a cardboard folder becomes heavier than all of it. General Croft watched me carefully. He wasn't evaluating the evidence. He already trusted my work. He was evaluating me. Are you certain? Simple question, not easy. I looked down at the dossier. The answer should have been immediate. Instead, my thoughts drifted somewhere unexpected. Saturday mornings. My father teaching me how to shoot. Family fishing trips before Prescott Dynamics became enormous. My mother laughing during backyard cookouts. Brantley before he learned to measure people by their usefulness. The memories were real. That was the hardest part. Villains are easier when they're strangers. I finally met Croft's eyes. I'm certain. The general nodded once. No speech. No pressure. Just understanding. He had spent decades watching good people make impossible decisions. He knew exactly what this cost. I slid the dossier across the table. The movement felt strangely small. Almost insignificant, like signing a receipt. But I knew better. General Croft opened the file. The room remained quiet as he reviewed the summary pages. Occasionally he turned another sheet. Occasionally he paused. The deeper he went, the harder his expression became. Not surprised. Disappointed. There was a difference. Around 15 minutes later, he closed the folder. The sound echoed softly through the room. Neither of us spoke immediately. Finally, Croft folded his hands. The evidence is overwhelming. I nodded. He looked at me for a long moment. Then came the warning. Not legal, personal. Once this moves forward, there is no reversing it. I already knew, he continued. Federal warrants, asset seizures, criminal prosecution. Each phrase landed calmly, matter of fact, no drama. Reality rarely needs dramatic delivery. Then his voice softened. As far as your family is concerned, you'll lose them forever. There it was. The cost. Not the company, not the money, not the headlines, the family. For a moment, neither of us said anything. I thought about my father's office, his complete refusal to even read the note. I thought about Brantley's signatures. The bonus payments, the substituted materials, the thousands of service members who would trust armor carrying the Prescott name. Then I answered, quietly, firmly. They lost me the moment they put a price tag on a soldier's life. The general didn't respond right away. Instead, he simply nodded, a slow nod, the kind given between people who understand each other without needing further explanation. For the first time all morning, I felt something lift from my shoulders, not relief, clarity. The decision was finished. Now came the consequences. Croft opened a second folder. Operational planning, timelines, authorization requests, federal coordination. The machine was beginning to move. Unlike my father, I knew exactly how powerful institutions could be once they committed to action. We spent the next hour reviewing execution plans, evidence preservation, financial seizure procedures, coordination with military investigators, Department of Justice involvement. Everything moved with surgical precision. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody celebrated. This wasn't revenge. People seeking revenge smile. The people in that room looked tired, professional, focused. At one point, Croft slid a calendar across the table. A specific date was highlighted, Saturday. I immediately recognized it. The annual Prescott Family Charity Gala. Support our troops. The words practically made me laugh. Every year, politicians attended. Veterans attended. Military families attended. The event generated millions in publicity. Brantley loved giving speeches there. My father loved standing beside him. Photographers loved both of them. The hypocrisy suddenly felt unbearable. General Croft noticed my expression. Problem? I shook my head. No. Then I corrected myself. Actually, yes. I looked at the highlighted date. My family will spend that evening talking about supporting soldiers. The general glanced toward the dossier, then back at me. Neither of us needed to say anything else. We both understood. The timing wasn't symbolic, it was practical. The suspects would all be present. The evidence chain would be protected. The operation would be cleaner. Still, the irony was impossible to ignore. The people profiting from defective armor would be fundraising in the name of the troops endangered by it. Croft picked up the authorization packet, then he signed. One signature, several initials. A final approval stamp. The sound of the stamp striking paper landed heavily against the conference table. Once, twice, 3 times. Each impact echoed through the room, the same way my father's office door had echoed the day before. Except this sound meant something very different. Grace had been offered, grace had been rejected. Now federal justice was officially on its way to the Prescott estate. And for the first time since this nightmare began, the countdown had a date attached to it. The first thing I noticed was the banner, Support Our Troops. 30-foot letters stretched across the entrance pavilion of the Prescott estate. Anyone driving in could see it. Anyone attending could photograph it. Anyone reading tomorrow's newspaper would believe it. That was the point. The parking areas were packed with luxury vehicles, political donors, defense executives, state officials, retired military officers, television crews. The annual gala had become one of the most talked about charity events in the region. My father loved that. Brantley loved it even more. Public admiration was the family business. I parked near the far edge of the property and stepped out into the cool evening air. The familiar sounds drifted across the estate, music, laughter, glasses clinking together, the distant hum of generators powering event lighting. Everything looked perfect. Perfect things always make me suspicious. I adjusted my dress uniform before walking toward the main entrance. There was nothing flashy about it. No oversized ribbons, no rows of decorations, no polished collection of medals designed to impress strangers. That wasn't how my career worked. Most of what I had done couldn't be displayed publicly anyway. My uniform looked almost boring. My father hated that. To him, success only counted if people could see it. The event staff greeted me politely. Several recognized my last name. A few looked surprised I had shown up at all. I understood why. I hadn't attended the gala in nearly 3 years. Family events became easier once I stopped pretending to enjoy them. Inside the main pavilion, hundreds of guests filled the estate grounds. The shooting ranges had been converted into reception areas. Display tables showcased military equipment manufactured by Prescott Dynamics. Large video screens played promotional footage. American flags lined nearly every walkway. Patriotism was everywhere. Authenticity was harder to find. I accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing server and moved through the crowd. Nobody paid much attention to me. That was normal. Most people gravitated toward power, toward influence, toward whichever person happened to be standing closest to a television camera. Tonight, that person was Brantley. He stood on the main stage beneath a giant Prescott Dynamics logo. Confident, relaxed, completely unaware. The applause started before he even began speaking. Brantley loved that too. He adjusted the microphone and smiled. My family has always believed in supporting the brave men and women who defend this country. More applause, he continued. Every contract we secure is about protecting lives. Another wave of approval rolled through the audience. I watched several veterans nod. That part hurt, not because they believed him, because they had every reason to. Trust is supposed to mean something. Brantley kept going. We never forget who we're serving. The audience applauded again. I nearly laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was absurd. 4 days earlier, I had reviewed documents proving the exact opposite. Now the man responsible was being celebrated for his commitment to service. The performance was flawless. The reality wasn't. I checked my watch. 7:18 p.m. Still early. The operation wasn't scheduled yet. The countdown continued. A familiar voice interrupted my thoughts. Well, look who decided to attend. I didn't need to turn around. Brantley always announced himself before entering a conversation. I faced him calmly. His smile looked friendly from a distance. Up close it wasn't. Good speech. Of course it was. Naturally. He glanced at my uniform. The smile faded slightly. That's what you wore? I looked down. Seems that way. His jaw tightened. I enjoyed that more than I should have. Before he could respond, another voice joined us. My father. Von Prescott moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone who believed the entire evening belonged to him. Technically, it did. At least for now. His eyes immediately settled on my uniform. Disappointment appeared right on schedule. You couldn't find something more presentable? I took a sip of water. It's a military uniform. It looks unfinished. There it was. The Von Prescott review process. Nothing ever passed inspection, especially me. He leaned closer. Several politicians stood only a few feet away. A local news crew was filming nearby. My father lowered his voice. Why are you here? The question wasn't curiosity, it was irritation. I met his eyes. Family event. You haven't cared about family events for years. Fair point, still not the right answer. Brantley crossed his arms. Honestly, Keeley, you're making people uncomfortable. I looked around. Nobody seemed uncomfortable, except them. What people? You know exactly what I mean. No, I did not. That annoyed him further. My brother pointed toward a display rack showcasing ceremonial firearms used during previous fundraising events. Come with us. It wasn't a request. The two of them guided me toward the weapon displays at the edge of the pavilion, far enough from most guests, close enough to keep an eye on me. The strategies was familiar. Control the conversation. Control the optics. Control the embarrassment. Unfortunately for them, they weren't controlling the situation anymore. They just didn't know it yet. The music continued softly in the background. A string quartet played near the main tent. Servers moved through the crowd. Donors laughed. Photographers snapped pictures. The entire evening flowed with polished precision. Meanwhile, my internal clock kept moving, minute by minute, second by second. I knew exactly what was coming up the long estate driveway. Not yet, but soon, very soon. My father folded his arms. Listen carefully. That phrase usually meant trouble. You don't represent this company. I know. You don't represent this family. I said nothing. Brantley stepped in. And you certainly don't represent the military community standing here tonight. Interesting. The irony nearly broke me. Not anger, not fear, just disbelief. Somehow the man selling defective armor had convinced himself he was the authority on military service. I glanced toward the estate entrance. Still nothing. Not yet. The driveway remained quiet. The guests remained happy. The illusion remained intact. For a few more minutes, my father followed my gaze. Are you even listening? I looked back at him, very carefully. The answer sounded innocent. It wasn't. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't listening to what Von Prescott wanted. I was listening for the vehicles that were about to change everything. The first vehicle arrived exactly when I expected it to. Not that anyone else noticed. The estate driveway stretched nearly half a mile from the main road. Guests couldn't see the entrance from where we were standing, but I knew the route. I knew the timing. Most importantly, I knew the people inside those vehicles. My father was still talking. Brantley too. Neither realized their audience had already stopped being important. The only people who mattered now were getting closer by the second. You always do this. Brantley shook his head dramatically. Every family event. I raised an eyebrow. Attend? A nearby donor laughed before quickly pretending he hadn't. Brantley didn't appreciate that. His face tightened. You know what I mean. I did. I just enjoyed making him work for it. Several guests had begun paying attention to our conversation. Nothing attracts a crowd faster than tension. Especially rich people. Rich people love drama as long as it belongs to someone else. My father noticed the growing audience and immediately shifted into performance mode. The charming executive, the patient family man, the reasonable adult dealing with a difficult daughter. I'd seen the act before. Most people had. Few recognized it. Nobody wants conflict tonight, Keeley. Translation. Stop embarrassing us. I glanced toward the crowd. Several politicians stood nearby, military donors, corporate partners, retired officers, people my father had spent years impressing, the perfect audience. Unfortunately for him, the show was about to change genres. Brantley suddenly reached toward one of the ceremonial display racks. The estate sets maintained a collection of antique and commemorative firearms used for fundraising demonstrations. Most weren't loaded. Most weren't functional. They existed for photographs. Brantley grabbed one of the ceremonial shotguns and pulled it free. A few guests chuckled. They thought this was another joke. Brantley stepped toward me. Here. He shoved the shotgun into my hands, not violently, but not politely either. The gesture was meant to humiliate, to remind everyone where he believed I belonged. If you're going to wear the uniform, he said loudly, at least pretend you know how to hold a weapon. Laughter spread through the group. Not everyone laughed. Enough did. I accepted the shotgun without resistance. The polished wood felt cool against my palms. The weight was familiar, comfortably familiar. Years of training never leave you. My father immediately joined in. That laugh. The same laugh. The one I'd heard my entire life. Dismissive, condescending, certain. The laugh of a man who had never truly believed he could lose. He pointed toward me with his glass. That's the problem. Several guests turned toward him. Von Prescott loved an audience. You have no rank. More laughter. He wasn't even trying to lower his voice anymore. You never had rank. The crowd shifted slightly closer. Nobody wanted to miss whatever happened next. My father smiled, the smile of a man delivering what he believed was a final verdict. You have no authority. A pause. Then the sentence. The same one he'd thrown at me in his office, only now he wanted witnesses. You have no rank, Keeley. Silence settled around us. Not complete silence. The quartet still played softly in the distance. Glasses still clinked. Conversation still existed elsewhere across the estate. But inside our small circle, everything paused. I looked down at the shotgun. Not at my father, not at Brantley, the weapon, calmly, methodically, professionally. My thumb moved toward the action. Click. The sound was small, but everyone heard it. A few smiles disappeared. Empty, exactly as expected. Then I closed it. Smoothly, effortlessly. The way someone does after thousands of repetitions. Not for show, habit, training, muscle memory. Years of it. The crowd grew noticeably quieter. Brantley's confidence faltered for the first time all evening. My father frowned, and something finally felt wrong to him. Good. I slowly cocked the shotgun. The metallic sound cut through the gathering. Sharp, precise, uncomfortable. Suddenly nobody was laughing. I raised my eyes, locked onto Von Prescott, the man who spent decades believing he understood me, the man who never once bothered to ask. His expression shifted. Confusion, then concern, then something close to uncertainty. I spoke softly, almost gently. My rank doesn't officially exist. The words landed exactly where they needed to. For a moment, nobody reacted, because nobody understood. Not yet. My father stared at me. Brantley stared at me. Several guests exchanged confused looks. Then everything changed. The estate doors opened, not explosively, not dramatically, No shouting, no chaos, no movie-style raid. The exact opposite. Quiet, professional, controlled. The first federal agents entered in dark suits, then more, then military investigators, then military police. They moved with the terrifying confidence of people who already knew the outcome. No rushing, no hesitation, no wasted motion. The quartet stopped playing. One violin note died in midair. The room froze, conversations collapsed. Every head turned, every face changed. People instinctively stepped aside as the entry team moved through the crowd. Politicians, executives, donors, none of them mattered. The agents walked past all of them, straight toward me, straight toward the Prescott family. I watched realization begin spreading across Brantley's face, slowly, painfully, like a crack moving through glass. "No," he whispered it before he even understood why. My father remained motionless. For perhaps the first time in his life, Von Prescott had absolutely no idea what was happening. Then General Thaddeus Croft entered the pavilion. The room might as well have stopped breathing. Even people who didn't know him immediately recognized authority when they saw it. 4 stars, perfect posture, absolute composure. Croft ignored the cameras, ignored the donors, ignored the politicians, ignored my father, ignored Brantley. He walked directly toward me. The crowd parted automatically. Nobody wanted to stand in his way. The general stopped 3 feet in front of me. For a brief second, the entire estate stood frozen. Then General Croft snapped into a flawless salute. Crisp, precise, unmistakable. The sound alone echoed across the pavilion. Every eye widened, every mouth fell silent, and then he spoke. Not loudly, he didn't need to. Commander Prescott. The title hit the room like a rifle shot. Shock spread through the crowd. My father's face went completely white. Brantley looked like he had forgotten how to breathe. General Croft never looked away from me. "The perimeter is secure." A pause. Then the sentence that shattered the Prescott empire. "Warrants are executed." Absolute silence followed. The kind of silence so complete it almost becomes sound of its own. And for the first time in his life, Von Prescott finally understood that the daughter he had spent years dismissing was the one person in the room with the authority to destroy everything he had built. Nobody moved, not immediately. The room remained frozen around General Croft's salute. I lowered the ceremonial shotgun and handed it to the nearest military police officer. No one stopped me. No one said a word. The silence was doing enough. Across the pavilion, cameras that had arrived to cover a charity gala suddenly found themselves documenting the collapse of a dynasty. Brantley was the first to recover, or at least try. "This is insane." His voice cracked halfway through the sentence. The confidence was gone, the polished executive, the future CEO, the man who loved standing in front of microphones. All of it vanished in seconds. He looked toward my father, then toward the agents, then back at me. Like someone searching desperately for a hidden camera, a prank, a misunderstanding. Anything. This is some kind of mistake. One federal agent stepped forward. "It isn't." Brantley immediately switched strategies. People like him always do. First denial, then outrage, then bargaining. "I know senators." Nobody responded. "I know people at the Pentagon." Still nothing. The agent calmly produced a warrant packet. Brantley never even looked at it. He knew. The moment he saw federal investigators standing beside military police, he knew. The game was over. 2 agents approached him. The handcuffs appeared. The reality arrived. For the first time in my entire life, my brother looked small. Not physically, spiritually. All the arrogance had been stripped away. What remained wasn't power, just fear. Nearby donors quietly backed away. Several politicians suddenly became fascinated by the exits. Amazing how quickly friendships disappear when subpoenas enter the room. One executive who had spent years calling my father his closest business partner left without saying goodbye. That might have been the most honest thing that happened all night. Brantley's eyes found mine. There was anger there, confusion too, but mostly disbelief. "You did this?" The question sounded almost childish, like he couldn't imagine consequences applying to him. I answered honestly. "You did this." He opened his mouth, then closed it again, because there was nothing left to say. The evidence already had. Meanwhile, Von Prescott hadn't spoken a single word. Not one. He simply stood there, motionless, watching. The federal agents moved throughout the estate. Evidence teams, investigators, military auditors, every part of the operation unfolded exactly as planned. Yet my father's attention never followed them. It stayed on me, the entire time. For years he had looked at me with disappointment, then dismissal, Then irritation. Now something else had replaced all of it. Recognition, not respect, not yet. Something more painful. The realization that he had spent decades misunderstanding the person standing in front of him. His empire wasn't being destroyed by competitors, or politicians, or regulators. It was being dismantled by the daughter he believed had accomplished nothing. That truth seemed harder for him to accept than the handcuffs. General Croft stepped beside me. The operation is proceeding smoothly. I nodded. Neither of us smiled. There was nothing to celebrate. A company was collapsing. Families would be affected. Employees who had done nothing wrong would suffer uncertainty. Justice matters. But justice is rarely clean. That was something my father never understood. Every decision creates consequences beyond the people making them. One of the investigators approached Vaughn. "Sir, we need you to come with us." The words finally broke the spell. My father blinked, slowly, like he had just awakened from a dream. Then he looked at me again. Not the commander, not the investigator, just me. His daughter. For a brief moment, I saw the man who used to help me practice shooting when I was 13. The man who once carried me inside after I fell asleep during a family road trip. The man who existed before power became his entire identity. Then the moment disappeared. The agents waited patiently. Vaughn took a step forward, then another. As he passed me, he stopped. The room around us seemed to fade, not literally, just the way intense moments narrow your focus. His voice was quieter than I had ever heard it, trembling. Why? One word, nothing more. I already knew what he meant. Why destroy your own family? Why expose your own blood? Why choose strangers over us? I looked at him, really looked at him. Not as a suspect, not as a defendant, as my father. Then I gave him the only answer I had. "You taught me that armor is supposed to protect people, Dad." His eyes never left mine. I continued. "I just decided to protect them from you. No anger, no revenge, just truth." The words landed harder than any accusation ever could. My father looked away first, for the first time in my life. Then the agents escorted him toward the exit. I watched him go, not because I wanted to, because endings deserve witnesses. Across the pavilion, the giant banner still hung above the entrance. "Support our troops." The slogan looked different now, more honest somehow. Because for once, someone actually had. The crowd slowly began dispersing. The illusion was over. The performance had ended. The cameras would spend weeks discussing the scandal. The newspapers would spend months analyzing the investigation. People would argue about politics, contracts, money, corporate ethics. That wasn't what mattered most. What mattered most was much simpler. The armor would never reach deployment. The substitutions would be exposed. The shipments would stop. Thousands of service members would wear equipment they could trust. Thousands of families would never know how close they came to receiving a knock on the door. And that was enough. General Croft nodded toward the estate entrance. "Ready?" I looked around one final time. The shooting fields, the pavilion, the wealth, the status, the legacy, everything my father had spent a top day built. Then I turned away. No reason to stay. Together, we walked toward the driveway. The night air felt cool and clean. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying two lives at once. No cover, no secrets, no pretending, just certainty. The flashing lights behind us grew smaller with every step. I never looked back. Some victories aren't loud. Some don't come with applause. Sometimes honor looks like walking away from everything familiar, because protecting innocent people matters more. The estate disappeared behind us. The road stretched ahead. And as I stepped into the darkness beside General Croft, I finally felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Peace. Walking away from the Prescott estate should have felt like a victory. A lot of people probably imagine it that way. The corrupt company was exposed. The guilty people were arrested. The truth came out. Case closed. Real life doesn't work like that. The following Monday, I sat alone at my kitchen table drinking coffee that had already gone cold. My apartment was exactly the same as it had been before the investigation. The same old bookshelf, the same worn couch, the same leaky faucet I kept promising myself I would fix. Everything looked normal, nothing felt normal. People often think justice creates happiness. Sometimes it creates peace. Those aren't always the same thing. I wasn't celebrating. I wasn't smiling. I wasn't replaying the moment federal agents walked into the gala. I kept thinking about something else. The years before that night. The family dinners, the holidays, the conversations that should have happened but never did. Looking back, I realized something important. The biggest mistake in my family wasn't corruption. Corruption was the result. The real problem started much earlier. It started with silence. Every time someone ignored a lie because confronting it felt uncomfortable. Every time someone excused bad behavior because it came from a family member. Every time someone said, "That's just how he is." Those small moments add up. People don't usually wake up one morning and decide to become unethical. They get there one compromise at a time, one excuse at a time, one ignored warning at a time. I've seen it happen inside corporations. I've seen it happen inside government agencies. I've seen it happen inside families. The pattern is always the same. Someone crosses a line. Nobody says anything. The next line becomes easier to cross. One of the hardest lessons I learned during my career is that silence feels harmless when you're standing close to the problem. It rarely is. Years ago, I investigated a contractor who falsified maintenance records for military transport vehicles. The first report wasn't about money, it was about convenience. One supervisor skipped a required inspection. Another employee noticed. Nobody reported it. The following month, more inspections were skipped. Eventually, an accident happened. 2 service members were seriously injured. The investigation traced everything back to that first ignored violation. Not because it was the worst offense. Because it was the moment someone had the chance to stop it, and chose not to. That's the part many people misunderstand about loyalty. Loyalty is not protecting someone from the consequences of their actions. Loyalty is caring enough about them to stop them before those consequences arrive. My father never understood that distinction, neither did Brantley. In their minds, family loyalty meant unconditional protection. No questions, no criticism, no accountability. That isn't loyalty. That's permission. And permission can be incredibly dangerous. I know some people listening to this story may be facing something similar right now. Maybe not criminal behavior, maybe not corporate corruption, but perhaps someone in your life keeps crossing boundaries. Maybe it's a relative who lies constantly, a friend who manipulates people, a coworker who cuts ethical corners, a family member who hurts everyone around them while expecting endless forgiveness. You've probably been told to keep the peace. You've probably been told not to make trouble. You've probably heard phrases like, "Just let it go." Sometimes that's good advice. Sometimes it isn't. The difficult part is learning the difference. Because there comes a moment when staying quiet no longer protects relationships. It protects dysfunction. That realization changed my life. For years, I told myself I was preserving my family. I told myself maintaining my cover required patience. I told myself I could tolerate one more insult, one more holiday dinner, one more conversation, one more year. The truth was much harder. I wasn't protecting my family. I was protecting my hope that they would eventually become the people I wanted them to be. Hope is a beautiful thing, but hope becomes dangerous when it prevents action. At some point, reality deserves more respect than wishful thinking. The night of the gala wasn't the moment I lost my family. That happened long before federal agents arrived. It happened when profits became more important than people. It happened when my father dismissed human lives as acceptable losses. It happened when my brother knowingly signed approvals that put soldiers at risk. The raid simply revealed what was already true. And that's another lesson worth remembering. The truth doesn't create problems. The truth exposes problems that already exist. There's a huge difference. If someone becomes angry when the truth comes out, their anger is usually aimed at the wrong person. The truth teller isn't the cause, they're the messenger. I won't pretend any of this was easy. It wasn't. There are still days when I miss parts of my family. There are still memories that make me smile. Life is complicated enough to allow both things to exist at the same time. But if I could go back and relive every moment, I would make the same decision again, without hesitation. Because at the end of the day, courage isn't always standing up to enemies. Sometimes courage means standing up to people you love. Sometimes doing the right thing costs more than doing the easy thing. And sometimes the price of silence becomes far greater than the price of speaking the truth. That's the lesson I carried away from everything that happened. Not that justice always wins. Not that good people always get rewarded, but that silence is never neutral when lives are on the line. And the longer we wait to confront what's wrong, the more expensive the truth becomes. One of the strangest things that happened after the investigation became public was reading what people thought the story was about. Some thought it was about power, others thought it was about revenge. A few people focused entirely on the federal raid, the arrests, the headlines, the dramatic ending. I understood why. Those were the visible parts. People naturally notice explosions more than foundations. But if I'm being honest, none of those things were the most important part of the story. The most important part happened years earlier, long before the warrants. Long before General Croft walked into that gala. Long before anyone knew who I really was. It happened every time I chose not to let someone else's opinion define me. That sounds simple. It isn't. Most people spend at least part of their lives trying to earn approval from someone. A parent, a spouse, a boss, a sibling, a group of friends, someone's. We're social creatures. We want acceptance. We want respect. We want the people closest to us to recognize our value. There's nothing wrong with that. The problem begins when our entire identity depends on it. For years, my father believed I was unsuccessful. Brantley believed I was irrelevant. Neither thought I had accomplished much. Neither thought I had influence. Neither thought I mattered. And if I had allowed their opinions to become my reality, they would have been right. Not because their judgment was accurate, because I would have surrendered my confidence to it. That's something I wish more people understood. Other people's opinions have power only when we hand them the keys. Nobody can take your self-respect without your participation. I learned that lesson slowly, and not always gracefully. There were nights when the insults got under my skin, days when I questioned myself, moments when I wondered if maybe my father was right. Maybe I should have chosen a different path. Maybe I should have chased promotions people could see. Maybe I should have built a career that impressed guests. Maybe I should have cared more about appearances. Those thoughts happen. They happen to everyone. Confidence doesn't mean never having doubts. Confidence means refusing to let those doubts make decisions for you. One memory stands out. About 6 years before everything collapsed, I attended a family Christmas dinner at my father's house. Brantley spent most of the evening discussing a new waterfront property he had purchased. At one point, he looked at me and asked whether I still rented my apartment. I told him I owned it. The condo wasn't large, nothing fancy, but it was mine. Brantley laughed. Then he asked how long it would take me to afford a house with a private dock. The room laughed with him. Even now I remember the feeling, not anger, embarrassment. The kind that sneaks up on you. For about 10 seconds, I felt small. Then something occurred to me. I liked my apartment. I liked my life. I slept well at night. I wasn't trying to impress strangers. The person judging me wasn't happier than I was. He was simply louder. That realization changed everything. A lot of people confuse confidence with dominance. They aren't the same thing. The loudest person in the room is rarely the most secure. Secure people don't spend all day proving themselves. They don't need to. My father spent decades chasing status, titles, recognition, influence, the next contract, the next achievement, the next public victory. And somehow it was never enough. There was always another mountain, another rival, another scorecard. Meanwhile, some of the strongest people I've ever met had none of those things. I've served alongside men and women who never appeared in newspapers, never received awards, never became famous. Yet I would trust them with my life without hesitation. Why? Because character matters more than visibility. The world often rewards visibility. That's different. One of the reasons the words "you have no rank" stopped hurting me is because I eventually realized my father was talking about the wrong kind of rank. He meant titles, position, status, hierarchy. The things people can see, the things printed on business cards, the things announced at award banquets. But there are other kinds of rank. The rank earned through integrity, the rank earned through trust, the rank earned by doing the right thing when nobody is watching. That kind doesn't come with applause. And that's exactly why it matters. If you're listening to this and feel overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed by people around you, I want you to remember something. You do not need universal approval to have value. You do not need everyone to understand your journey. You do not need permission to respect yourself. Some people will never recognize what you bring to the table, not because you lack value, because they're looking for the wrong things. Don't waste years trying to convince those people. Build your life anyway. Do your work anyway. Grow anyway. Learn anyway. Become the person you're meant to become anyway. One of the greatest freedoms in life arrives the moment you stop auditioning for acceptance. That's when confidence becomes real. Not because everybody finally approves of you. Because their approval is no longer required. And looking back now, I think that's what true strength actually looks like. Not power over other people, not secret authority, not federal investigations. Just the quiet ability to know who you are even when nobody else does. And to keep walking your path until the truth eventually catches up. A few months after everything happened, I found myself standing in front of a display case at a military museum. Inside were pieces of equipment from different eras: helmets, field radios, body armor, photographs, letters, artifacts from generations of service members who had carried the weight of protecting others. I stopped in front of an old ballistic vest. Nothing special about it. No famous history attached to it. No dramatic story written on the plaque. Just a piece of equipment designed for one purpose: protection. And standing there, I realized something. The entire story you've just heard was never really about armor. Not the physical kind. Not the kind manufactured in factories. Not the kind tested in laboratories. The most important armor in life is something else entirely. It's the set of principles you carry when nobody is watching. It's the values that protect you from becoming the very thing you claim to oppose. Because here's the truth. Most people don't wake up one day and decide to become dishonest. Most people don't plan to compromise their integrity. Most people don't intend to drift away from their values. It happens gradually. A shortcut here, a rationalization there, a small compromise that seems harmless, then another, then another. Eventually, the person staring back from the mirror becomes someone you barely recognize. That's why principles matter. They're guardrails, they're protection, they're armor. Throughout my career, I worked with people from every possible background. Different beliefs, different personalities, different political opinions, different life experiences. The people I respected most all shared one thing. They knew where their line was, and they refused to cross it, not because it was easy, because it was necessary. My own line was simple. Human lives are never acceptable collateral damage for personal gain. Not for money, not for promotions, not for public recognition, not for family loyalty, not for anything. That principle guided every decision I made during the Prescott investigation. Without it, I would have talked myself into staying silent. And silence would have been easier. Much easier. But easier and better are rarely the same thing. That's something I hope every person listening remembers. In your own life, you may never face a situation involving federal investigations or defense contracts. Most people won't. But you'll face moments that test your character. Everyone does. Maybe it's in your workplace. You discover something unethical and have to decide whether to speak up. Maybe it's in a friendship. You realize someone keeps taking advantage of your kindness. Maybe it's inside your family. Someone repeatedly crosses boundaries and expects endless forgiveness. Those moments matter more than most people realize, because every decision becomes practice for the next one. One of the healthiest lessons I learned is that boundaries are not punishments. They're protection. Many people struggle with that idea, especially good-hearted people, especially people raised to prioritize everyone else's comfort. They feel guilty for saying no. They feel guilty for creating distance. They feel guilty for protecting themselves. You shouldn't. A lock on your front door doesn't mean you hate your neighbors. It means you value your home. Boundaries work the same way. Protecting your peace isn't selfish. Protecting your values isn't selfish. Protecting your future isn't selfish. It's responsible. Another lesson worth sharing is this: forgiveness and access are not the same thing. A lot of people confuse them. You can forgive someone without giving them unlimited opportunities to hurt you again. You can wish someone well while keeping healthy distance. You can release anger without surrendering wisdom. That's not bitterness. That's maturity. For a long time, I thought strength meant enduring everything, taking every insult, absorbing every disappointment, carrying every burden. I don't believe that anymore. Strength isn't measured by how much pain you tolerate. It's measured by how faithfully you protect what matters most: your character, your integrity, your peace of mind, your values. At the end of this story, some people might assume the most satisfying part was watching my family's empire collapse. It wasn't. The most satisfying part happened long afterward. It happened when corrected armor shipments reached the people who needed them. It happened when safer equipment entered service. It happened when soldiers received the protection they had been promised. Most of those men and women will never know my name, and that's perfectly fine. Recognition was never the goal. Protection was. That's why I slept peacefully after everything ended. Not because someone lost, because innocent people won. And if there's one lesson I hope stays with you after this story, it's this. Your integrity will cost you something. Sometimes it costs comfort, sometimes it costs relationships, sometimes that costs opportunities. But betraying your own conscience costs far more, always. Thank you for spending this time with me and following this journey all the way to the end. I'd genuinely love to hear from you. What was the biggest lesson you took away from this story? What part stayed with you the longest? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy stories that explore family, character, justice, and real-life lessons, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. New stories premiere every day at 8:30 a.m. ET and 1:30 p.m. ET. Make us part of your daily routine, and I'll see you at the next premiere. Until then, take care of yourself, protect your values, and never underestimate the quiet strength that comes from doing the right thing when nobody is watching.